Here we are with Ben Wilson, historian at Cambridge University and author of Metropolis, a very thick and interesting essay about the history of the city, humankind's greatest invention, as the subtitle goes. In this very wonderful book, you lead us into a journey through the history of the city, and you show us very well how cities are our past. But the question is, are they our future too?
Yeah, good question. I mean, certainly in the past, the whole process of urbanization, as soon as we started urbanizing and bringing brains together and creating a kind of, an environment where people could come from different backgrounds and cluster together and exchange ideas and knowledge. And that's the beginning really of human history and the recording of human history. The first city of Uruk was where writing starts. It's where money, all our kind of basic ideas, and those sort of great sort of pulsating cities of the past throughout history, whether it's Athens or Rome, or whether it's London or Amsterdam or New York, wherever it happens to be, these kind of moments of huge kind of human awakening come in cities. So certainly, cities are bound up with our past and our history and how we've kind of our cultural evolution as a species. But looking to the future, I think urbanization is clearly defines the 21st century, which is really why I wanted to write this book, because we're urbanizing at a phenomenal rate in terms of the amount of people going to cities. I start the book saying that today 200,000 people will have made the journey to the city, mainly in developing countries where urbanization is a fact of life. Especially, we've seen it in China, we've seen it we're seeing it in Africa currently, where the world's biggest cities will be by the end of this century. Frighteningly large concentrations of people like Lagos or Dar es Salaam, Kinshasa will be absolutely enormous. So whether we like it or not, urbanization will define the century, not just for human beings, but for the world's ecology. Because although we're urbanizing as a species, as though human beings are concentrating more and more in cities, leaving the countryside, often they're not leaving the countryside, the city is coming to them. And urbanization is swallowing up huge amounts of the globe's territory, and particularly in what are called global biodiversity hotspots, where where ecologies are incredibly important. So I'm talking about rainforests, estuaries, savannas, wetlands, places of huge concentrations of animal and plant species, as well as now being joined by human beings. So for all those reasons, from a human point of view and an ecological point of view, urbanization is going to define this century. It is going to be the urban century, and we've got to think very clearly about how we urbanize, and what the implications are, and how we can do it better to maximize the benefits of the city for us as human beings, but also for the environment. That's going to be the key thing, and the key way whether cities can actually help the environment. By concentrating people in smaller places, they can be more energy efficient, and they can also be managed for greater biodiversity. I mean, that is the question that will define, one of the big questions that will define our ability to kind of continue to consume the Earth's resources, and to also to reap the incredible benefits of urbanization, not just for kind of big superstar cities like your New Yorks or Shanghai's or wherever it happens to be, but also more medium-sized cities where people can, by going to cities, can find a route out of rural poverty. So for all those kind of reasons, urbanization is going to be incredibly important in this century. So we need to really think about how we can build better cities.
That's the next question, right? That is, what will our cities look like in the future, or how should they look like?
How should they look? I think there's two ways of answering that. One's from a human point of view, and the other is from an ecological point of view. And those two things should really come together. A city is valuable for human beings, as I said before, when it concentrates people. And I'm not just talking about bankers clustering together, or advertising people, or software engineers. I'm also talking about people who have come from the countryside. You can see that in developing cities, that the networks that bring people together, the ways, the entrepreneurial side of developing cities is incredibly important for people. And you can get something very innovative ideas that come from the street, and happen almost spontaneously. I was thinking, I was in Lagos, Nigeria, relatively recently, and there's this place called Otiba Computer Village, which started really as a place where it was just a normal kind of suburban street almost, and some typewriter people who repaired typewriters happened to live there, and they made the jump into tech, and now it's the biggest market in Africa for electronics and for software, and it happens on the street. It's a creation of lots of people clustering together, and now there's tens of thousands of people working there. They serve apprenticeships, they compete on the streets. The big technology people like Huawei and whatever have to come in and compete with these entrepreneurial self-starters in the city, and it's where, you know, the millions of dollars change hand every day. It's a multi-billion-dollar business that happened from the streets. So people, you know, reaping those benefits of people coming together is important, and then that's how cities function. They function best when people are allowed to act spontaneously to better their lives, to form their networks, and planners respond to that rather than kind of creating an ideal city and trying to say this is the kind of the city. It's how planners can respond to the energies that cities create, the energies of bringing minds together, human bodies together, the sort of interchange of ideas of people coming from different places. Now, that often doesn't happen in big congested megacities, but there are cities where that can happen, where it's happened successfully. One example is Medellin in Colombia, which was the murder capital of the world at one point, the home city of Pablo Escobar, who kind of ran the city as his personal fiefdom. Now it's a sort of model for how you can regenerate cities by having connectivity between the poor neighborhoods of the city and the richer. And that involves better public transport. In Medellin, it involves cable cars and escalators. It also means putting cultural things that people want to go to and putting them in purposefully in the poorer areas. So there's a greater mixing of people between the cities, because as I look at the history of cities, the successful ones, it seems to me, are where people can mingle and meet, where they're not segregated by class or by race or by whatever artificial distinctions we want to put in. A happy city is one where people can interact and people have a route out of poverty by being connected to part of the city. Now, that's really, really hard in these enormous mega cities that can be 20 million people plus, and they sort of break up into a cluster. Really, you can only see them as a cluster of cities rather than one single city. So having that degree of connectivity within cities, I think, will be the most important thing for making them livable places. Cities that use every effort to bridge divides, not necessarily by heavy intervention, but by simple things like Medellin. Tokyo is another good example of how you can build a successful city on ruins and disaster. Modern Tokyo developed from the ashes of the Second World War when it was firebombed. The way that they built the Tokyo became a great world-leading city was because each neighborhood was given the power to develop the neighborhood as they wanted. So it was down to individuals and neighborhoods, which is deeply embedded in Japanese history. But it meant that you get a kind of what seems like a kind of disordered, a spontaneous, incrementally growing city is kind of bound up, is a creation of the street and the neighborhood, but you can build on top of that layer after layer of progress. So you start from the street level and build upwards. And I think that's incredibly important. And it goes against the sort of Chinese model, which is to plan cities, clear out neighborhoods, and put in place a sort of planned city. And I think that probably kills the energies that come from the street. You know, the two have to work together. Cities are the creation of the people that live there. The other way is a sort of intersection between ecology and social life and economic life. We have to make cities much more protected against the effects of climate change. That means more trees. Something like a city like Milan knows very well is, you know, putting in more green space and doing it innovatively. A little bit, but it's still, you know, there's innovations, right?
Yes.
And Milan is famous for that, I think. But it's having more trees to protect against soaring temperatures and also to soak up rainwater. So designing cities that are much more in tune with nature will protect us against those effects of climate change. So that means more wetlands, cleaner rivers, cleaner water systems, more forests in and around cities, more green space, maximizing green space by having vertical walls, green buildings, roof gardens, which will cool, soak up flood water, better shorelines that will defend, using natural processes. So I see, ideally the great cities of the future, or the ways that we can maximize the benefits of urban life, are, on a neighborhood level, to make them more connected to each other, better public transport, but also greener. So it augments the quality of life by kind of marrying our kind of economic needs with greenery and natural processes. Otherwise, cities will become unlivable, I'm afraid. And a lot of cities are suffering under floodwaters. And there's lots of good examples where cities are going back to natural processes. New York, which destroyed all its sort of natural coastline, is now urgently trying to restore marshland, oyster beds, waterside maritime forests, things like that, to try and sort of protect against rising sea levels and ferocious storms. And all cities have to do a version of that to restore, what we'd see as the natural hydrology. Copenhagen's a very good example of turning streets into much greener places that will soak up rainwater, and turning parks into places that can retain excess water by re-sculpting the landscape of parks to turn them into temporary water parks when it rains. Things like that, I think, will be the innovations that we'll be looking for in the future to protect ourselves, to make cities resilient, which cities have always been resilient against all kinds of external threats, one way or another. Today, the threat is from climate change, and really that, cities that can think innovatively and really preempt the kind of the worst ravages and mitigate the effects of climate change by becoming much more ecologically minded, will be the cities that will probably prosper the best, because they will keep the quality of urban life as good as they can in very challenging times.
But there's another threat to big cities still going on, unfortunately, which is the pandemic that has brought out the big risks of being altogether concentrated in a very small area. So can mega cities still be our future after the pandemic and this frightening experience and kind of disconnected experience of not living together?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, the pandemic has been awful for cities and people who live in cities. It turns all the things that should be benefits of cities, kind of turns it on their head. The chance encounters, the mixing and mingling of people, the kind of fun of the sort of the unpredictability of the social life of the city, which is their kind of engine oil. Really, it's the thing that powers them, is that sociability. When that goes, cities become almost unbearable places. Whether the city is a dark and dangerous and sometimes frightening place is something that's always gone through history, right? The cities have always been places that have been transmitters of diseases, whether the ones that we've created ourselves through poor sanitation in the industrial city, or even before the Black Death in the Middle Ages, were places that caused an awful lot of turn the benefits of the cities on their heads. The cities have always come through these things, and I think our biggest challenge is to keep faith in cities, because, as I said before, I think our future is bound up with living at a reasonable amount of density, because because otherwise we're just going to ruin what's left of the natural world if we continue spreading out. So to have cities is urgent, but to maintain them as attractive places for people to come to is, I agree, a massive challenge in a time of pandemic, when we've seen a move away from the city, people talking about leaving. For a lot of people, that's not an option. Remember, people will continue to live in cities and maximize the benefits of them. Like previous pandemics and public health disasters in cities, often they've been the chance for cities to rebound and build back better. I'm thinking the Black Death in Europe was although it killed a huge amount more people than this pandemic has killed, did have an energizing effect on urban life across Europe. It allowed more people to come in from the countryside to take the places of people who died. it really kind of gave a benefit boost to the European economy. So as a historical event, that was incredibly important for cities. When you were living through it, it probably didn't seem like that. It would have been horrendous. It's like what we're going through now. We don't often see the opportunities until we look back in hindsight. I think one of the benefits, or one of the positive things I should say that could come out of the pandemic, is to change our relation between the city centre and the suburbs. That at the moment cities are very, the typical model is cities are very concentrated on their central districts, which have become, in a lot of places, very kind of empty places at the weekends or nighttime. If you have a more kind of dispersed form of work, which could well be the case, then it reopens buildings back for residential or cultural uses in the centre. I'm not saying this is going to happen, by the way, but I'm just thinking that cities do respond. They're too powerful, really, to completely kind of fail like that. And maybe, dispersing some of the functions of the cities to closer to where people live might not be such a bad thing. I don't know if that's such a big thing in European or Italian, particularly cities, but especially in the United States or Britain, where cities have really kind of pancaked out and sprawled into big areas, that it's degraded city life. Maybe city life could become better if we extend the idea of what it is to be urban into districts that we're always seen as suburban and devoid of kind of life and activity and energy. That maybe if people are working there and spending more time working at home and spending one part of their working life in the city and one part in their neighborhoods, they'll want the cafes and restaurants and cultural experiences closer to home, perhaps. So that could potentially change cities. It might put an end to the very kind of mass-produced form of cities that we're seeing around the world, of skyscrapers appearing everywhere. There was some terrifying statistic I saw that the amount of tall buildings increased from about 300 or 400 at the beginning of the century to currently close to between 3,000 and 4,000. And if the trends continued, there would have been 41,000 very tall high-rise skyscraper type buildings by the middle part of this century. And there's no bad thing about a skyscraper, by the way, but it's this sort of mass-produced kind of race to kind of give cities a particular kind of look and feel. Isn't always good for the people that live there. It sort of deadens the center of cities. You see that in lots of kind of developing cities where there's a race for growth. The skyscrapers push out life. So maybe we will reverse that trend and make cities places that are better to live in, and offer more open space that puts nature as a priority. As I was saying before, maybe this will push that forward, that when we are experienced being confined to our homes or very close to our neighborhoods, that we will want places to connect with nature. And maybe cities can think more innovatively about what it is to combine wildlife and wildness in an ecological sense with economic life, and that would make it a more attractive place to live in cities. I think we've always, we've got to carry on making cities attractive, and to say we will go back to a time when we can meet and socialize and mix, and that's always been that kind of sensual, fun, exciting, bohemian, whatever, all those kind of things that make cities tick will come back, and they're hugely pleasurable. There's something to look forward to. And when cities are in a time of recovery, that can be a very exciting time to be in cities as they readapt to a new world. That can be challenging, but can also be kind of fun, especially when you're young and being part of a kind of urban renaissance, or getting back to the excitements of a city. So I think we should keep our sense of that cities are valuable to us as humans, valuable to the planet, and that they will come back, and not to lose faith in them, not to cut and run and desert the city, because actually cities do come back. Cities that have been bombed, destroyed, besieged, suffered economic collapse, they've tended to, in the medium to long term, or sometimes in the short term, to come back bigger and better after each disaster. And I think history is full of those kind of those experiences and those examples. So we should keep our faith in the cities and keep being excited about them and their possibilities for the future. Otherwise, there will be all kinds of disasters, and chief amongst that is sprawling out and thinking we can endlessly kind of conquer new space, So I think don't be downhearted about the city, even in these tough times. I think keep faith that they will continue to be exciting places, and places where change and innovation happens, and where a lot of fun happens as well.
And that's a very optimistic view that you express in your book too. And as you say, since the beginning, why is the city our greatest invention?
Well, I say that because it seems to me, especially going back to the very first city, Uruk, which was in Mesopotamia, which is now southern Iraq, but that's where the first urbanization occurred, in this kind of marshland city that that sort of began to build and to concentrate people together. But when that happened, this is about 7,000 years ago, within an astonishing short amount of time. I'm still talking hundreds of years, but in his, by the standards of history and what had gone before, the innovation and invention happens very quickly when people are brought together in these cities like Uruk, and it's other cities that that emerge at about the same time in the same place and interconnect with each other. The complexities of living urbanly and living in that density at that time forces people to interact in a different way. It releases people from subsistence agriculture, and they use their minds, they exchange ideas, they're fiercely competitive, they're also collaborative. That's what cities do by clustering people together and forcing them into this kind of this very complex, challenging situation. You start to get things like writing and money, number systems, the beginnings of literature, beginnings of business and trade on over a long scale. That seems to me to be inconceivable without a process of urbanization. And that's, as I said before, that's when history begins to a certain extent. That there's that cities inject this life and energy into human affairs. But there's also the bad stuff that goes with that. Uruk is where we see the beginnings of slavery, the beginnings of kingship, of war, tyranny, organized armies. So an invention, it can be great without being good. It can be consequential without necessarily bringing us benefits. And that's always something I wanted to bring through in the book. It's not just about optimism. It's about the downsides of city life as much as their good sides, and how that has acted as a tension that runs through history, this kind of collision between people who have detested and hated and feared the city and people who have been optimistic, and this continual dialogue between the two. And going forward from that first city, that's the kind of prototype. But it could also extend to modern Lagos, where people are innovating on the neighborhood scale. But between those two types, between the first city and the 21st century megacity, for sure, it's that any kind of bringing together of people in whatever form it takes, whether it's a great big city or whether it's on a university scale, it's still the same process. It's the institutional forms that a city creates, but it's also the informal things that happen in bars or in cafes or in restaurants, kind of accidentally. That's the city kind of creates these conditions for accidental meetings. That is the way that we collaborate and form new ideas. Socrates spent his time talking to people in the poorer, more immigrant districts of ancient Athens. It wasn't in a kind of university setting. It was by by sort of accepting and embracing the spontaneity and sort of weirdness and unpredictability of the city that lots of ideas come out like that. There's the cities of the Italian Renaissance. Similarly, it's people coming from different places, coming together and being forced to be highly competitive with each other. Is important. You could go to and an example I use is in the 17th and 18th century, at the beginning of the kind of modern financial capitalism, really occurs in coffee houses in London, which was a new thing. The coffee house comes to Western Europe first in London, and it's a place where scientists meet traders, who meet merchants, who meet brokers and bankers, poets, actors, all kinds of people exchanging ideas. So you get the beginning of kind of news journalism is this exchange of people coming together into the coffee house and just talking, people who don't know each other, strangers who will converse and share information. The beginnings, the thing that underpins modern capitalism, the insurance business, happens famously. It happens in a London coffee house at the end of the 17th century. It's where these people come together and can exchange information and ideas, and you get the beginning. So, in the insurance markets begin over a cup of coffee. it's where the scientific revolution that was occurring kind of behind closed doors almost in London and the English universities, where that meets businessmen and traders who are going to explore the world. They meet over coffee. They don't meet anywhere else. It's this kind of the conditions that cities create for people to have these chance encounters, which is built upon sociability. And whether it's artistic, like the Parisian cafes, or whether it's business like London in the 17th and 18th centuries, you know, cities are really good at having the beginnings, the kind of the ingredients that you need for invention. So I'd say that all inventions ultimately stem from the city, whether they're good inventions or bad. I think, you know, as a force in human history, the city is almost second to none as a generator of ideas and the bringing together of people, as because they form this function of crossroads of goods. They become crossroads of people as well. And by having this continual flow of people into the city, in and out and between cities, this kind of networked effect within cities and between cities, that's where we get our inventiveness. And I think, you know, it's an interesting way to look at human history as almost a passing of the baton from one great city to the next, one place where you know, where ideas, where sort of like factories of ideas or forcing houses where ideas come together in particular sort of circumstances and places and times. That's a good way for looking at history as a, you know, as we've found new ways for people to associate and new things that make that sort of pleasurable, you know, new foods, new things like bringing coffee and coffee houses and cafes into cities, you know, this continual renewal and excitement that the city is always a work in progress. There's always something new to discover. There's always a new attraction that draws people there from around the world. All those things are sort of vitally important as ways to look at how we've progressed, or dare I say it, regressed in some ways. That cities can be you know, unpleasant and difficult places to live in, but still we do it. Still we find ways to adapt ourselves to the city. And the city kind of, we change cities, they change us as well. And that's really what I wanted to get across in the book, is this kind of continual sort of sense of change and dynamism in cities through time and over different geographies and different places. There's always this kind of recurrence of very similar phenomena that really is, you know, important to understand us as a species in the past, but also going into the future.
And there is another aspect that you point out in the book, an aspect about everyday city life that is very important for us in Italy too. That is the role of food and of street food in particular.
Yeah.
So which is this role? It's got a very important role, you say.
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, I think food and eating has always been the kind of motor of sociability. That if you think about, I don't know, ancient Rome or Baghdad in the Middle Ages, there were places where people were crammed into very sort of small places, like we go to cities now and put up with small apartments or incredibly high rents because we want to be part of the city life, particularly at stages in our life. That a lot throughout history, most of life was conducted in public, right? You know, the idea of retreating to your private home in a city is a very recent kind of invention. That life was always public or semi-public and conducted over food, whether it's, you know, bars and street food being an important aspect of the social life of ancient Rome. But particularly, I've sort of centered this part of the story on medieval Baghdad, because it was a place that was sucking in goods and commodities from around the world, including as far afield as China. These ships that traverse the ancient world, the Indian Ocean, sort of linked together these great trading cities, or overland on the Silk Roads, all kind of converged on Baghdad as this central point, bringing new cuisines and bringing and immigrants, people coming to the city. It was a place of startling kind of cosmopolitanism. And if you know, people who have made their, you know, place, the first generation of people that have come to the city have won the heart of the city they're coming to through its stomach, by bringing new foods, by bringing things that will tantalize the taste buds, and this continual kind of novelty of eating food kind of, makes the city supremely attractive. It brings people together. Baghdad was a crossroads of ideas. It's where our modern ideas of mathematics and philosophy and medicine and engineering are brought together by the combination of the Mediterranean cultures meeting the Central Asian, Chinese and Indian cultures in these kind of crossroads cities of Central Asia and Baghdad. And they met and they socialized over food. And Baghdad was a great example of that. The street food was delicious. And the stories of caliphs sort of donning the disguise of ordinary working people to go out and sample the street food, I think is sort of wonderful stories. That here was cities are innovative places, but they're also innovative because people are competing for your appetite, for your hard-won money to buy something delicious. And it's one of the great kind of benefits of living in the city or visiting a city as a tourist, especially these days, is to participate in this kind of gastronomic culture. People will go and live in cities. They will rank cities as desirable places to live or to holiday in because of the food they offer. And cities that are cosmopolitan in their people that come to live in them will be cosmopolitan in their food offerings as well, and make it exciting. But I go back to this sort of idea of people moving about the cities in the past, going from one district to another to sample food or just to eat food. Food was eaten on the move, on the street corners. It's a great way to meet people. Nowadays, with street food, is a bit more commodified. It's a bit more expensive. It's a bit more part of a kind of sort of faddy, fashionable, chic kind of way to experience the city through through street food. But it's it's pleasurable, and it gets you out and about in the city. It makes you an urban explorer as you go and track down the latest great restaurant or street food place or unlikely spot that's serving great food. I mean, that's a story almost as old as cities themselves, that the pleasures they offer and the excitements and the kind of the added extras. This isn't a book which is just about cities as powerful places of government and banking and religion. It's also a place where people go to exchange more fundamental things, much more kind of instinctive things like food or like coffee. These are the things that generate interest and meeting spaces for people, and a continual shifting kaleidoscopic thing that a city is, that it's constantly reinventing, and it's reinventing itself around things like food, and people come to the city. A good example is modern day Los Angeles, which was famously, it's a car-based suburban city where things happen at home and you travel by car. The introduction of Latino immigrants with bringing in food trucks as a way of feeding the city has completely changed Los Angeles. It's sort of, food has been a great motive for change in a city like Los Angeles and lots of others, because it creates kind of much more pavement-based, street-based public culture in a city that was based around the car and the private home. Suddenly there's a kind of opening up of the street as thousands of vans open up. It's made even more powerful by social media and the sharing of information that way, that people can move about the city and go to different places to eat. And it changes the character of these neighborhoods by having these kind of mobile food trucks. So that's a really good example of a way that the new people coming to the city, repurposing it, can change it. And food's a really good example of the kind of the unlikely ways, or the sort of sometimes sort of neglected ways that cities continually evolve, and they evolve through things like food or coffee or eating and drinking. It's our fundamental needs that the city can satisfy in more exotic and exciting ways than anywhere else.
And so the last question is, which are or will be the most surprising, fascinating cities in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think time will tell. I think quality of life, as I was kind of saying before, that how cities can change from being places of skyscrapers to places of excitement. Maybe it will be the cities that offer a fantastic quality of life. They may not be the biggest and best, that now we can be more mobile and work almost from anywhere. We still need the face-to-face contact, but maybe that will sort of break down the kind of the process that had been happening from the end of the from the late 20th century and into the present century, which was the concentration of power and wealth in a few select cities, so big sort of global players. Maybe that will break down, and maybe that won't be such a bad thing. Maybe there'll be a transference of power. Maybe when we're thinking about the city, being pessimistic about the city, maybe we're being pessimistic about certain types of cities that we've been kind of become used to sort of celebrating as the kind of the most important, powerful cities, the big kind of leading global places for finance or whatever it happens to be. Maybe there'll be a move towards and a repopulating of mid-sized cities, which will be good places to bring children up, will be small enough and sort of fun enough for people to still socialize and mix. And maybe there'll be a reordering of the kind of the global hierarchy of cities. Then maybe it'll be, you know, the middle-sized cities. Maybe it'll be a city like Tallinn in Estonia, which is small, offers a good quality of life, is easy to get around, and it has fantastic digital connectivity. Maybe it'll be a city like that. Or maybe in an American context, it won't be the big, you know, big cities that become harder to live in during pandemics. And maybe it will be the cities that do offer the cafes and the food and the culture, but on a more manageable scale. And maybe, yeah, that will be the process, will be cities that can respond the best and will be fun, interesting, green, ecologically sound places to live in, which will be that will be the innovations that we will concentrate on. It won't be the smart tech, it won't be the skyscraper, it will be the neighborhood cafes, the vibrancy of an urban ecosystem which supports small startups, working from home, the cafes, good schools, all those kind of things. So I hesitate to say which cities those will be necessarily. I think we can all try and imagine what they will be like. But what is important is preserving the urban ideal. It's not sort of going off and disappearing into suburbs. It's reanimating and spreading out that kind of urban ideal so it permeates more places. It's more decentralized away from these sort of big sort of superstar cities and becomes part of everybody's life that you have. And that this is the essence of the urban, is to have on your doorstep all the things you'll need on a daily basis: a good baker, a good cafe, a good shops, all those kind of things, an ability to mix and socialize and interact. That's what it is to be urban. It doesn't have to be done in these great big cities. It can be done on a much more humane, smaller, more manageable scale. So I think those kind of cities have the potential to really prosper, and every country has them. They might have been cities that have gone down over the last 50 years, but there's a tremendous possibility for an urban revival that spreads and conquers new territory almost, or reconquers territory where it was before. So I think, you know, I think keep alive that urban ideal, insist on it, you know, don't become lost in sort of suburbs, or if you're working from home, become alienated from what makes the energies that make a city tick. Just spread it. We've got to be more urban, less suburban, less spread out. We've got to kind of live in this kind of concentrated, relatively dense way, because it's good for us. It's good for the environment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.